let's talk about law enforcement. How's that sound?
I'd like that a lot. I think, again, you talk about the imperfection, or the imperfection is the perfection. Law enforcement would fall in that category.
Well, we're talking, we were talking before we started recording about freedom. And I think the kind of bled into this conversation about you having some friends that were cops or are cops, or and both of us having friends that have been arrested, and we've both been arrested as well a couple times for humorous things, I guess, in hindsight. But yeah, it's got to be awfully difficult to be a cop right now, no matter how you feel about all of this shit,
Yeah,
I think it's the same thing that's happening in the political landscape. Is there's certain people that are making it so difficult that we're scaring away the people that would be best suited to do that kind of a job, right? I don't think we're attracting the best people for political purposes, because politicians get bashed. Their families get attacked. They get threatened now, and cops are like, if you do anything that could even be remotely considered racist, you're going to either lose your job or you're going to go to jail. And it's
so let's talk about it. The framework of this. Let's talk about law enforcement related to a time and a place in history that we'll never forget, right? Which was during COVID and the BLM protest. And the decisions that were made, deliberate decisions made by the leaders in certain states, cities, and even at the federal level.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew it at the moment. I remember talking about it, saying, this is not good. This is a turning point, or a tipping point. And that if we don't enforce the laws, and that's what was happening, right? Let's agree or disagree on that there were mayors, governors giving orders to stand back during these protests.
Stand down, yeah.
To stand down. And then if you look at that and you fast forward to today, and then we'll even have some fun jumping around to even our childhood and about how law enforcement did shape us when we were growing up, and we have our individual experiences with law enforcement, it sounds like. But yeah, I think to put it in context, you have to look. I could not feel stronger about how we talked about leadership before, but the weak leadership that somebody made a decision to let that group of people do whatever they want without consequences.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you take it back, to our childhoods. I was telling you a story. I got arrested when I was 12 for doing what we call bumper skiing. Must be a northeastern thing, or anywhere there's snow. The snow gets packed on the roads over a period of days, and the cars come back out. You can't drive fast, but you can drive. Some people put chains on their tires, but bumper skiing is you hide behind the snowbank by the stop sign, and when the car comes to a complete stop, you run up behind the car surreptitiously. You're crawling kind of, and you squat down and you hook your hands underneath the bumper, and you go for as long a ride as you want. And they busted me one day and took me down to the jailhouse and put me in a cell. And then they called my parents and talked to them. And then one of the cops goes, "Come on." And he drove me home. The funniest part of the story is when he pulls up in the front of the house, I go, "Thanks for the ride, officer." He goes, "No, I'm walking you to the door." And I'm like, "Oh, fuck." He knocks on the door. My mother opens the door and she just looks at me. She doesn't say anything. And that was worse than saying something. But I actually thought I could just walk out of the cop's car and get away with it, And then there was another time. But I mean, I had complete and total respect for the cops. But I think if you had bad experiences.
But did it shape your life? I mean, did you learn something by being taken to the police off? And I mean, I don't know if you were booked and went through the process. Did it curve your behavior? And did you realize that, hey, maybe I shouldn't be doing this? I mean, what were the consequences? Because I think if you don't have a society with consequences, then what you have is what we have right now. I mean, look at some of the stuff that's going on in crime. And I know a lot of old people complain about this, but this is pretty serious. I'm speaking for what I see right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. It is out of control. Completely out of control.
You're in a hotbed. I heard Ron DeSantis visited there. I think it was him recently. And he's just like, no, I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it. We spent a couple of days there, and between people defecating in the streets and homeless people and, they're scared. They're scared to walk to work. It's
Yeah,
going to have an
that's San
impact on,
Francisco. Just so you know, I remember I
yeah,
live 30 minutes east of that, and
yeah,
where I live, there's none of that.
yep,
I never see that, but
yep.
right over the hill, whether it's Oakland or San Francisco, it's completely archaic.
Well,
It's out of
yeah,
control. It's like
yeah,
it is like a movie.
yeah. That's
It's
what I've heard. That's what I've heard. And what a shame. I used
but
to say to people, San Francisco is one of my favorite places in the whole
but there's
country.
laws that aren't being enforced that have created that. So how did that happen? Well, that's leadership, right?
Well,
It's also our justice system, by the way, because a lot of the times people don't realize is that there's groups that protect them to so-called protect their civil liberties or their constitutional rights that often does not allow cities and counties and states to enforce the rules because they get challenged, and that's
my
underlining
understanding,
problem that we have.
yeah, my understanding is that the chain of command, if you will, is if at the street level, if you will, you have the police, right? They're on the street identifying crimes being committed. Their job is to
Enforcing the laws. That's why they call it law enforcement. Laws
and
made by politicians.
that's right. And then the criminals are put in front of at some point are put in front of a district attorney, and the district attorney sentences them or doesn't, lets them off. And apparently there's quite a bit of that going on as well. Those district attorneys, I believe, are elected officials. Those elected officials are elected by people that are being influenced by your governor, Gavin Newsom, and all of his cronies, who are absolutely batshit crazy liberal.
No
right?
question.
So they're influencing the elections of these district attorneys and purposefully putting in district attorneys that have told them, just tell us what you want us to do and we'll do it. They're not going, we know what the law is and we're going to enforce the law. They're going, hey, Gov, what do you want us to do? And we'll do it.
Yep.
And so, and Trump was walking around getting rid of those people. DeSantis has gotten rid of a couple of them here in Florida. And, but if the governor wants this, he'll get it, and then all of a sudden you have a police force that's like, well, if I do anything that could even be remotely interpreted as racist, I might not just lose my job, I might end up in jail, right? So how can
lose their pensions and lose their ability to provide for their families? This is, like you said, devastating to them personally and professionally.
Well, and I think that, on the other side of the argument, it's like, well, too many young Black men are getting arrested, right? For no reason. I'm like, okay, well, let's look at that statement, for no reason, right? Because if that's the case, that's not good either, right? But I think if you looked at the statistics, I know that if you looked at the statistics, you'd find that young Black men are inordinately responsible for the number of crimes that are committed as a percentage of the population. They're 13% of 7% of the population, because you're not even talking about women, and they're committing 50% of the crimes. Well, that to me, that's not just a math problem. That's a real problem. There's a solution in those numbers somewhere,
But the answer is not to stop enforcing the laws.
No, I don't believe it is.
You're not helping them at all. I'm just using your first experience with the law. I'll get into mine later. I think it did curb your behavior. And if you don't have some consequences, I could see the times. First time I'm arrested many times, but especially before I was 21. But I remember, stupid things, and they would take you home, and you get in trouble or you get arrested, and so on and so on. The funniest story was, I think first one I got it for stealing a cash machine out of a laundromat. That didn't go so well. They're hard to take off the wall. They really are. It's not to get any money, but I got caught doing it. But that was like at 12 or 13. And the big ones, my first one was 14, because I was at the beach, and I started hanging out with the locals, and we started drinking beer, and somehow we ended up in some car, and somebody says, "Can you drive?" I said, "Sure, I can drive." 14 years old.
Yeah.
So I had it was like an old station wagon or something. We had like eight kids in the car, and I drinking beer, and I got pulled over. Not good. So, I was able to transfer the paperwork to the, my local court. And then I got out. Basically, I told the judge, listen, this was pure pressure. And, he liked me taking responsible for it. And somehow I got out of that one. And,
I've gotten out of a couple of potential ticketing situations by just being polite and respectful.
yeah.
I think cops are, and of course this varies depending on where you are. Cause if it's a wealthy white suburb, that's a different environment and climate than in an inner city, poorer neighborhood. And, where there's just by the nature of circumstances, there's going to be more crime. There's going to be more violent crime. There's more dense populations. There's more poverty. There's more desperation. But, I think I was saying earlier, I had tremendous respect for the police, probably because my parents had tremendous respect.
Yeah, I was
for the
going to
police.
say every one of these, the punishment at home was worse than the punishment
Absolutely. And I
than the
think
police
that's,
gave me. And
I think that's
and
where the,
I'll never forget that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's where when you were talking about, did it impact my behavior? I immediately thought, well, was it the cops' actions that impacted my behavior, or was it my parents' actions? And I think it was my parents' actions.
Yeah.
But,
I was on restriction for a month. I had to paint the house the whole summer. I'll never forget it. And it was 100 degrees outside, and that was my punishment.
Yeah. Well, but to our point about this accountability thing and enforcement of the laws, it's going to be interesting. And I'm not optimistic that I think a lot of cops are retiring early. I think a lot of people that were thinking about becoming cops are no longer thinking about becoming cops. And neither one of those trends is good for anybody. It's just not,
I also think that cops, I really, really value what cops do. And they would take care of a lot of little things. And the best way was somewhat to intimidate the criminals, so they knew there was consequences.
Yep. Yep.
And that's what good police work is. Also, the good cops do. There was a toughness about them that you didn't want to mess with them. And if you look at even physical, if you look at the police force today, they're very different in stature. Of course, women. Not that you can't be cops are some really great cops are women, but it's different. I mean, those were guys. They were tough guys. And you did not want to mess around with them, especially I imagine grow up in Boston, right? I mean, the whole entire force was Irish, right?
Yeah, or Italian. Yeah, I think that if I were responsible for legally for the behavior of a particular police force, I would like to think that I'd like your thoughts on this. If you physically accost a cop, your rights go away.
Oh, absolutely. I think the punishment to an officer in any way, even verbally, by the way, I don't know if you listen to the way they talk to police officers, that alone would be a great place to start. If you allow somebody to say anything they want to a police officer, then that's a whole breakdown, right? I do think that they should be treated differently. Because
I remember it might have been 2 years ago now. It was in the beginning of this Black Lives Matter thing. There were people pouring bottles of water over the heads of cops in downtown New York City, and the cops weren't doing anything about it because they were told not to.
Yeah. That's why I completely blame the leaders.
How does anybody think that's a good idea? How does what happens when you put a group of 20 kids from all walks of life, doesn't matter what they look like, and you say there's a bunch of stuff in here that you can't touch, right? And I'm going to go, I got something to do, and I'm going to go, I'll be away for a couple hours. What do you think the state of that room's going to be when you come back in a couple of hours without any supervision whatsoever?
Yeah.
There's no rules. It's going to be chaos.
It's what it's become.
somebody's going to be cut. Somebody's going to be bruised. Something's going to be stolen. Somebody's going to be arguing with somebody else. And if you left for 4 hours, it would just get worse.
Yeah.
You have to have accountability. You have to let them enforce the law.
Yeah.
If we want to change things. And then there's this other idea that white cops are just blowing away black guys for no reason.
That's so untrue.
There aren't any statistics to support that.
Yeah.
Right.
But I do want to bounce out the conversation a little bit. When my son was going to ASU, this is the difference between Arizona and, let's just say, California, right? There's very big difference in terms of law enforcement from state to state of how they do that. But I did have this one experience where it was some kind of a college event or weekend or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm. And
I remember walking across the street, and this kind of homeless guy, he was like a, skinny white guy, kind of long hair, drug addict or something, who knows, and there must have been 7 cops on top of this guy.
Yeah.
And it was also an example. I could see, if you have too many police officers with nothing to do, and they've been trained to treat everybody like a terrorist, because at that time it was the training. They were just doing their job, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be a cop, that's kind of like a military person. They were instructed to do things certain ways. Mm-hmm. I also got to experience how too much law enforcement is not good either. And then of course, if you go to another country, like even like England or Europe, there's police around, but they're not like terrorists, anti-terror. They haven't been trained to treat their own citizens like terrorists.
Right.
So a lot of them don't have guns. Sometimes they have billy clubs and things like that. So I do think we went too far at certain times, where we don't want to live in a society where police can just beat the crap out of people. I think this guy was jaywalking or something, right? So there has to be a balance. I understand the other side of that too. And then also, growing up where I did, if you were say a 10-year-old young man, and only time you saw police come into your life was when they were dragging your uncle out of the house, or beating up your, stepdad or dad or whatever it is. And that's all you see.
Yeah.
You can understand why they grow up and don't trust police.
Well, I know a lot of people. I shouldn't say a lot. I know some people who like, oh, cops suck, pigs, I smell bacon. And it's like, well, I'm pretty sure that either you or someone in your family close to you was mistreated by a cop at some point in time. Mm-hmm. And you've thrown a blanket over the entire police force. And I'm right almost every time.
Yeah.
And I think that, not that I was any goody two shoes or you were any goody two shoes, but the shit I got arrested for, driving a car when I was 15, that's just stupid. I guess a little dangerous, I suppose, but I was very coordinated and I could rationalize my way out of that. But the bumper skiing thing, I was sitting at a party at one of my buddies' how they rented a house on Cape Cod every summer, and these guys just got crazy. And this particular house there were residential homes on both sides, and this was like Animal House. I was just sitting there talking to a girl. Just talking, and we were both drinking a beer, and then all of a sudden, and I had a good buzz on, and all of a sudden somebody goes, "Cops!" And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not doing anything, right? People start jumping out of windows and running into the woods. Somebody called the cops because of the noise or the beer cans or whatever. And I didn't have any history at this house. I didn't realize we were potentially going to get raided, and I had to jump out the back window and run away.
Yeah.
So the cops came in, and this female cop just picks me up and turns me around and handcuffs me. And I was, because I had a buzz on, and I didn't do anything. I'm like, "You bitch." And as soon as it came out of my mouth, I went, "Oh." And then she whacked me on the back of the legs with a billy club, and I went to the ground. And then I had to go. 2 weeks later, I had to come back down from Boston and go to court, and it was dismissed because I told the story, and I apologized for my language. I said I had too much alcohol. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was of age, but I was disrespectful, and for that I apologize. And I, you know, I just think that it's interesting that you and I both said at the tail end of the accountability to our stories wasn't the cops, it was our parents. And I think that's missing
But
for
you know
too
what I
many
also think is
kids.
missing, and I'll tie this into a story. What's missing is teaching young, and I'm mainly speaking of young men, you know, teaching and women how to interact with police. It's like there's a protocol. If you give them respect, if you help them with their job, like anything else in life, it's going to go a lot better. And how you engage them. I'll share a quick story. This is, I do these campouts from my high school,
Yep.
former high school. And so every year for the last 15 years, the entire football team, varsity only, that's like 30 players, come for the night, and we cook them a bunch of food, and they spend the night, and they, because I have a big yard where they camp out. It's a traditional thing. But one year, it was a few years ago, and remember, I live in an all white area, right? But my high school is everything but white in my former high school, right? So I say everything. It's just a mix of everything, but so, so we're at, they're driving my golf cart around, having fun doing this. And I guess some kids from local kids were threw an egg at the golf cart, and when they were driving around down the street, right? So I was like, oh, they can't do that. That's wrong, right? And of course, all 30 of these kids, I think we had one white kid that year, but everybody in town is white, right? So this is like, you can't miss it, right? As far as the difference, right?
Yeah.
But we did 15 years, never had a single incident. Great kids, right? That's like, they look forward to it, and we never had an issue. Anyway, this year this happened. So I get all mad. I was like, fuck these guys. I said, so because I bought like 5 dozen or more than that, probably like, 10 dozen eggs for the morning, because I'm making breakfast the next morning. So I had them all grab a big carton of eggs, and we were hiding behind the fence waiting for this car to go by, because we were going to get these guys back, right? I said, look, if they did it once, they're going to come back. So I had the whole team and me behind the fence waiting for these guys to come back, because we were going to take the breakfast for the next morning, just nail these guys, right? And anyway, they never end up coming back, luckily. So we brought the eggs back, and then before I know it, of course, here comes the police, and one of the kids so here comes the police down the driveway, and they all run. So I said, hey, listen, guys, don't first of all, they all started running. It's go into the backyard. There's a fence that they were coming into, and I said, and they were all behind me. And then I engaged not, of course, not just one cop, like 3 cops come down the driveway, and I knew they were all watching me. But the main point was, this woman gets out of the car, and she says, I understand, there's a party here or something else. And I don't really think it was a white black thing. I think they were called because people saw all these kids running around, our high school kids, and big kids, right? And so I said, she says, can we come in your backyard? And I said, no, you cannot come in my backyard, because they're all sitting behind the fence, right? Yeah. And again, they were all watching me interact with this police officer, and she was a woman. And first of all, and then it was after that, it worked out. She left, and I went back and I said, hey, guys, I'm glad you got to see this in life. Number one, know your rights, but be calm, be courteous, talk to them and give them the information, but also know your rights. The rights where they're not allowed to come in. This is private property. You weren't doing anything wrong. This is, I have a large piece of property. It's almost 2 acres, right? Yeah. So I said, and they're not used to that, right? They're used to being in a park or an apartment building. The long and short of it was a learning moment to teach them how to interact with police.
Yeah.
And I knew how I handled that was going to change for the rest of their life. They'd see that. And I absolutely did not want to make it about race. It wasn't about race.
No, so much of our problems, and beyond the topic of law enforcement and black-white issues and crime and stuff like that is this idea that how powerful it is to have a mentor, to have a model, as you like to say, and if you don't have a father, you as their mentor, or one of their mentors within that coaching group, that ex-player group, that is an invaluable service that you're doing for those kids, man. You're literally changing lives, whether you recognize it in the moment or not.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that. I also think it's important we have to help the police, help
Yeah.
them with their job. We don't want a society without them in it. And how you interact with them, understanding, what their role is, understanding what your rights are. I don't think we talk enough about that. But to change the future, you have to change the hearts and minds of people. And by the way, one of my alumni, he's a cop, and he comes to these events and helps cook and stuff. And the other one's an attorney that protects lawyers. And one year he came, he says, "Don't tell anybody I'm a cop. Just don't let them know." Right.
Yeah.
And of course, he's white, and he's a great guy. He was a cop for 25 years. So cops are great people. They're just great humans, and they see the basically the shit of life, right? So I don't think enough people understand what they have to deal with every day. And
no, when I talk to anybody that's anything less than deferential about cops, if they're at all negative about cops, I ask questions. And I'll tell you two more stories real quick that just popped into my head. It's funny what you remember. So years ago, 25 years ago, I'm in Clearwater, which is on the other side of Florida. I'm here in Orlando. And I'm driving back after a day at the beach, and I got no shirt on. I'm all tanned. I got no shoes on. I'm driving a gray Chevy Nova, 4-door Chevy Nova. And I don't speed. I never have been. I don't think I've ever gotten a ticket for speeding. It just doesn't turn me on. So I knew that wasn't the case. This guy pulled me over, and he didn't just pull me over. He got out of the car with his gun drawn.
Wow.
Yeah, with his gun drawn and a bullhorn. Get out of the car and get down on get down on the ground.
A bit excessive at the time. It must have seemed that way, right?
Well, wait until you hear the story. I'm scared shitless, but I also know I've not done anything wrong. So, but it's a weird thing, and if you've ever been arrested, to this day, if a cop turns their lights on when they're behind you, you're trying to figure out what you did wrong. Yep. It's like, so anyway, long story short, he puts me on the ground, he cuffs me, and then he goes and gets my license and goes back to his car, and then he comes back up and he's like, "Mr. Aylward, I owe you a tremendous apology. I'm so sorry." I said, "Well, that's cool. I'm sure you had your reasons, but would you mind telling me what they were? Because that was kind of fucking scary."
Yeah.
And he goes, there's another guy that fits your physical description, that doesn't have a shirt on, driving a 4-door silver Chevy, shooting at people on the beach with a BB gun.
Wow.
And I thought that was you, right? Yeah. We didn't have a license plate number. We just had the physical descriptions. And I'm like, well, that makes perfect sense to me, so you don't have to apologize, but thank you for the apology. We shook hands and I went on my merry way. And it was like 10 years later. I drive my car to the detailing place, and I got the $50 one, so it was going to be an hour and a half or whatever. And at the time, that was on a main drag. It's not a street that people typically walk on. If you see somebody walking on this street, might be a homeless person or somebody that's really challenged in some capacity, because it's almost a highway. But 3 or 4 doors down from this car wash was a restaurant that I liked. I'm like, it's lunchtime. I'm going to go grab a burger. So I go in there and I order a beer and a burger, and I'm sitting down talking to this guy, just shooting the shit. Nice guy, didn't know him. And all of a sudden I hear a voice behind me saying, "Stand up very slowly and put your hands behind your back." And I'm like, what the fuck? I turn around after my hands are cuffed, and there's a uniformed officer and a detective in plain clothes, and they both have their guns out. And I'm like, I don't remember exactly how long it took, but I think they looked at my license and they said same thing. "So sorry," took the cuffs off me. "So sorry, Mr. Aylward. There's a man that fits your physical description, just robbed a bank a block down the street and was coming this way. And when we saw you walk into the restaurant, we thought it was you." And I'm like, so I'm just saying, what is the purpose of those stories? Well, they're entertaining. Number one, they're it's clear cops risk their lives. They risk their lives all day.
They have to
And
make split-second decisions.
they don't know. They don't know if I'm the guy that might turn
They
around
don't.
and
Yeah,
kill them.
I know. I appreciate your story. Here's what you ask. Why'd you tell the story? The one thing that bothers me the most about the so-called racial profiling, they racial profiled you. That's
Yeah.
just good police work.
Yeah.
And you know what? If we have to be inconvenienced to protect the the community at that moment, I'm with you on that.
Dude,
we have to take that, but we cannot make that a lawsuit and get the guy fired because he had to make a split-second decisions.
Well,
And like you said,
I just told you, my initial reaction was I was fearful. I was in both situations. I was extremely respectful. I did exactly what was asked of me. And when they found out that it wasn't me, they were extremely accountable and apologetic. And I had not even an iota of an inclination to do anything to report them for misconduct. I was clear to me that you guys are trying to protect me. That's what you're trying to do. Both of you, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's
no, it's a great story. I'm glad you shared. I'm going to share one with you and then we'll wrap this up. So like I mentioned to you, I had got a few cousins that spent some time in prison. I mean, I'm talking like lifetime, or one spent over a decade. But this other one, we've become very good friends recently, kind of reconnected after 20, 30 years. But he was in and out of foster homes and really difficult childhood. And then when he was like 12 years old, the police came and he got in trouble. But this officer, Wagner is his name, I remember specifically. This is in California. It's actually Stockton, California. And this officer, when they had an interaction or something, he ended up becoming like his mentor, like his father to some degree. It's a remarkable story. And even though he was in the gangs and went out of prison for 20, 30 years, this particular officer and him would stay in contact. And in a few cases helped get him out and explain to the courts and everything. And then, I'm fast forwarding years. This had and he's to this day went to a service, became almost like a family member. He was like an adopted son. Mm-hmm. And he said that Officer Wagner absolutely saved his life. And now, being in and out of jail for all these years, he's clean now. He's doing great. He really wants to tell his story about how, if it wasn't for Officer Wagner, then he would be dead or still in prison. Yep. It's a beautiful story, and it goes to show you that cops are really, they want to see people do well. They want to help people. They're not these bad guys. And again, my cousin was very involved in the prison system and even in the gang life for decades. And it's a really cool story. I'm almost kind of letting him save some of the things, even some crimes that he helped solve. Yeah. That he would come to him and say, and remember, the fear of being a snitch is everything in prison. And he was able to even help him a few times get the right guy without giving up his own life.
I think you're right. I think the vast majority of cops are good. And I think that, why would you become a cop? You want to help people. That's why you become a cop.
And protect people.
You want to protect people. You want to put the bad guys away. You want to, you want help out with law and order. You'll see stories now and then of cops doing amazing things like your guy here, for little black children that, never get Christmas presents, and the cops bring them all over because they walk around the neighborhood. Yep. You don't hear, the mainstream doesn't talk about that.
No, not at all.
And so I think that's, to wrap it up, I think most cops are good. There are bad cops, and I think bad cops should be held accountable and kicked out. We got to start making that role more attractive for people, or we're going to run into a lot of trouble. Yep. And, when people get arrested for things and they're held accountable, if you want to keep that from happening more, chances are it's not really got anything to do with the cops. Mm-hmm. It's a family issue. It's a community issue. It's a cultural issue. It's a neighborhood issue. It's not, it's the cop thing is more symptomatic, I think, and they get a bad rap because the data just doesn't prove that they're overall systemically bad. It just doesn't.
No question. Great way to wrap it up, Mark. So.